My daughter handed me a glass of sweet tea and said, "Daddy, I'm so glad you're here." And I almost didn't make it to a wedding at all. Not because of traffic, not because of health, because 3 days before the ceremony, my wife of 31 years sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me she'd already filed. I want you to picture that for a second. Your daughter's wedding week. The cake is ordered. The flowers are being arranged. Your son-in-law's family has flown in from Phoenix. And your wife slides a manila envelope across the breakfast table like she's passing the salt. "I thought this would be easier," she said. "Before the weekend. Less distraction. I'm Harold Briggs. I spent 28 years as a plumber in Columbus, Ohio. Not a contractor with a fleet of vans and a marketing budget. Just me, my truck, a set of tools I bought piece by piece over 15 years, and a reputation for showing up on time and doing the job right. I fixed what needed fixing. I went home. I did it again the next day. My wife thought that made me small. I didn't know that for most of our marriage. I found out the way you find out most things that have been true for years, gradually, then all at once. Her name is Sandra. We met in 1991 at a 4th of July cookout at her cousin's house. She laughed at something I said about the potato salad, and I thought, that's the one. I was 26. I didn't know much about anything. I knew I wanted to be around that laugh for the rest of my life. We married the following spring. Our daughter, Becca, came 2 years later. Then our son, Drew, 3 years after that. We bought a house on Fernwood Drive in Westerville. I drove the same route to work every morning for 22 years. Sandra taught elementary school, then stopped when Becca was born, then went back part-time when the kids were older. We weren't wealthy. We weren't struggling. We were just a regular family doing regular things. Somewhere in there, Sandra started keeping score. I noticed it first at neighborhood parties. The Hendersons would talk about their lake house up in Michigan, and Sandra would laugh a little too enthusiastically. The Garcias would mention their trip to Portugal, and something in her face would shift, just slightly, like she was recalculating something. On the drive home, she'd be quiet, not tired. Quiet in a specific way that meant she was composing a thought she'd decided not to share. One evening, maybe 8 years into our marriage, she said, "Did you ever think about going back to school, getting licensed as an engineer or something?" I told her I was already licensed. Master plumber. It had taken me 4 years of apprenticeship and 2 exams to get there. She meant a different kind of licensed. That was the first time I understood that the thing I did for work, the thing that paid our mortgage, funded our kids' school clothes, put food on the table every single night, wasn't quite enough in her accounting. I didn't make a scene about it. That's not my nature. I went back to work the next morning and I thought about it while I was fixing a backed-up train in someone's basement. And then I did what I've always done when something bothers me. I put it somewhere quiet inside myself, and I kept moving. The kids grew up watching their mother explain my job to people. "Oh, Harold works in the trades," she'd say. "Pleasant enough, but never. Harold runs his own plumbing service and employs 3 guys. Never. Harold's the one they call when the city has a burst main at 2 in the morning. Just works in the trades." Delivered with a smile that had a small apology inside it. Drew picked it up. By the time he was in high school, he'd tell his friends his dad did contracting. When I asked him about it once, he got defensive. "It's basically the same thing, Dad." It wasn't. But I let it go. Becca was different. Becca would tell anyone who asked, "My dad's a master plumber, and he built his own company." She said it like it was something to be proud of because she thought it was. She's the one who turned out right in this story. Hold on to that. I need to back up and tell you about the money, because that's the part that changes everything. In 2009, the recession hit hard. I lost 3 of my biggest commercial contracts in the same 6-month stretch. Apartment complexes going under. New construction frozen. I had to let 2 of my guys go, and I hated every minute of that conversation. For about 8 months, things were genuinely tight. But I'd been paying attention to something. While contracts were drying up, property values in Columbus were hitting the floor. Houses that would have sold for $220 were going for $95, $110. I'd spent years going in and out of these properties as a plumber. I knew the bones of half the neighborhoods in this city better than most real estate agents ever would. I bought my first rental property in the summer of 2010. A 2-bedroom house in Clintonville, $48,000. I paid cash from savings I'd been building quietly since 2004. Money I kept in a separate account at a different bank. I'd always called it my business reserve. Sandra knew the account existed. She didn't ask about it much. She managed the household checking, the joint savings, the kids' college fund. She considered herself the financial mind of the family. She wasn't wrong exactly. She just wasn't looking at the whole picture. I want to be clear about something because I've thought about it a lot over the years. I didn't hide that account to deceive Sandra. I kept it separate because every time money went into our joint account, it found somewhere to go. A new couch, a vacation, school fees. That's fine, that money was for living. But I had this idea, going back years, that I wanted something separate, something I was building on my own terms. I was paying taxes on every penny. The account was real. Sandra simply never asked the right questions. After Clintonville, I bought a duplex in Dexley in 2012. A single-family rental in Grove City in 2014. Another duplex in Worthington in 2016. I was buying one property roughly every 2 years, always with cash or small mortgages I paid down fast, always through an LLC I'd formed in 2009 called Fernwood Property Group, named after the street we lived on. I always thought that was a little funny. By 2021, I had 6 properties generating just over $8,000 a month in rental income. I still drove the same truck. I still wore the same Carhartt jacket I'd had for 9 years. If you saw me at the grocery store, you'd think I was exactly what Sandra always introduced me as, a tradesman, a regular guy. I noticed the marriage changing somewhere around 2019. Sandra had joined a book club that seemed to involve very little reading. She started spending more time with a group of women from the gym who talked mostly about travel and renovation projects. She started describing our house as dated. She started saying phrases like, at this stage of our lives, and what we really should be thinking about in ways that felt like preamble. The book club had a leader. Her name was Trish, and Trish's husband was a periodontist. They had a boat. Sandra started referencing Trish's opinions the way some people reference scripture. In the fall of 2022, Sandra sat me down and said she thought we should see a financial advisor together. I said, fine. We went. The advisor looked at the household account Sandra had prepared and nodded along. Solid savings. Good college fund, though both kids were already done with school. Decent retirement picture. He never saw Fernwood Property Group. Neither did Sandra. After the meeting, she said, I just feel like we could have done more with what you've earned over the years. I asked her what she meant. She said, something more lasting. An investment, real equity. I nodded. I thought about the 6 properties sitting a combined 3 miles from where we were sitting. I said, you might be right. I know how that sounds. But I'd learned by then that information is a resource, and I wasn't ready to release it. Not yet. Things moved faster in 2023. Sandra started spending weekends at Trish's lake cabin. I found a credit card statement for a card I didn't know she had. Dinner for 2 at a restaurant we'd never been to together. A weekend hotel charge in a city she'd told me she hadn't visited. I'm not going to dwell on that part. It's the part that hurts most to tell. What I'll say is that by the time Becca's wedding was 6 months away, I already knew what was coming. I just didn't know the timing. Becca got engaged to a young man named Phil. Good man. Works in logistics. Came from a family with more money than ours, and I say that not with bitterness, but because it matters to what happens later. Phil's father, Don, is a regional manager for a distribution company. Nice man who'd shake my hand at family dinners. and then pivot pretty quickly back to conversations with Phil about quarterly numbers and market positioning. He wasn't unkind, he just didn't quite know what to do with a plumber. Drew, by then 30 years old, had developed his father's ghost problem. I'd come to understand that he'd told Phil's family that his dad was a business owner in property management. Not wrong, but not what he'd say if he was proud of it. Sandra, meanwhile, had appointed herself the architect of the entire wedding. She and Becca planned every detail. I was consulted about the check. That was my role. I wrote the checks. I didn't complain. Becca was happy, and Becca's happiness has always been worth more to me than being included in the seating chart decisions. 3 days before the wedding, Sandra put the envelope on the table. She had done it in stages, apparently. She'd spoken to an attorney months earlier. She'd moved certain things financially. She had a plan, and the plan included serving me the papers before the wedding weekend, so it didn't overshadow the celebration, she said, like she was doing me a courtesy. I looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then I looked at her. "Did you tell the kids?" I asked. She said Becca didn't know. Drew knew it was coming, at some point. I picked up the envelope. I didn't open it. I put it in the drawer where I keep my truck registration and my spare house keys. Then I got up and poured myself a cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window for a while. "Aren't you going to say something?" she said. "I'll say what needs saying," I told her. "Not this morning. I want to tell you what happened at the wedding. But I need you to understand the room first." The venue was a restored barn about 40 minutes outside Columbus. Beautiful place. String lights everywhere. Tables set with sunflowers because Becca had loved sunflowers since she was 4 years old. About 90 people. Both families, friends, co-workers. Phil's parents were seated at the family table near the front. Sandra was there too, composed and gracious because she is nothing if not composed in public. Drew sat next to her, Becca, before the ceremony, and squeezed my hand and said, "Daddy, I'm so glad you're here." And she looked at me in a way that told me she didn't know about the envelope. Sandra hadn't told her. I walked my daughter down the aisle. "That part I'm not telling you about. That part I'm not telling you about. That part is just mine." After the ceremony, after the toasts, after the first dance, it was time for the father of the bride remarks. I'd been asked to keep it short. Sandra had suggested I keep it simple, Harold, like I might embarrass someone. I stood up with a note card I'd written on earlier that week. The room went quiet. I said, "Becca, I have watched you become one of the most decent human beings I have ever known, and I have known some decent people in my time because the work I did for 28 years put me in people's homes on the worst days of their lives. And I will tell you this. In 30 years of showing up to flooded basements and frozen pipes and backed up lines at 2 a.m, I never once met a person who cared what kind of car I drove. They cared that I came." A few people smiled. Some nodded. Sandra was looking at her hands. I kept going. "Phil, you're getting a woman who knows what it means when someone shows up. That's the best thing I can offer you as advice. Show up. The rest of it takes care of itself." Then I said the part I'd been sitting with all week. "I want to take a moment to talk about something that happened at our kitchen table a few days ago. My wife, soon to be my ex-wife, served me divorce papers before this wedding. She has her reasons. I'm not here to argue them." The room went very still. What I am here to do is make sure my daughter knows the full truth about the man she's calling Daddy today. Because some people in this room have heard a version of me that I don't fully recognize, so let me tell you the version I know. I reached into my jacket pocket and unfolded a single sheet of paper. My LLC's most recent income summary, printed from my accountant's portal. I didn't read numbers off it. I just held it. I have been a plumber for 28 years. I've also been building something on the side for the last 14 years. 6 rental properties in and around Columbus, owned free and clear through a company I formed in 2009. Last year, that company brought in just over $97,000 in rental income. The year before, $89,000. None of that income was ever hidden from the IRS. All of it was documented, taxed, and legal. Some of it, however, was not visible to certain people who assumed they knew the complete picture of my finances. Don, Phil's father, was leaning forward in his chair. I continued, I'm sharing this not to embarrass anyone. I'm sharing it because my daughter deserves to know that her father was not the man he was sometimes described as. And because in about 30 days there is going to be a divorce proceeding, and I want the record to be clear before that proceeding begins about what belongs to whom. Sandra's composure broke. Not publicly, not dramatically, but I saw it. A slight collapse behind the eyes. Under Ohio law, I said, property acquired with separate funds and maintained to a separate business entity is considered separate property, not marital property. My attorney, whom I've been meeting with for the past 3 months, has documented every purchase, every down payment, every repair. I'm happy to answer any questions after the cake. A few people laughed at that last line. Nervous laughter, but genuine. I folded the paper, put it back in my pocket, and raised my glass. To Becca and Phil, may you always show up for each other. May you always ask the right questions. And may your plumbing never need attention on a holiday. I sat down. What followed was not a scene. Nobody yelled. Sandra didn't overturn a table. It wasn't that kind of night, because the people there were grown adults at a wedding, and most of them understood that something significant had just happened and behaved accordingly. Don leaned across the table and shook my hand. I owe you an apology, he said. I think I had the wrong impression. I told him no apology necessary. Drew sat for a long time without speaking. When he finally looked at me, he said, Dad, I didn't know. I believed him about the properties. I wasn't sure I believed him about everything else. But I let that go for the night. Becca found me by the bar an hour later. She was still in her dress, holding her shoes. She put her head on my shoulder and we stood there without talking for a while. How long have you known about Mom? She asked. Long enough, I said. Are you okay? I will be, I said. And I meant it. The divorce proceedings began in earnest 6 weeks after the wedding. Sandra's attorney, a sharp woman named, and I'll just say this, a very sharp woman, had clearly gone into the case expecting a standard division of a modest marital estate, a house, a joint savings account, a retirement account, some equity. What she found instead was Fernwood Property Group, 6 years of tax filings, 6 deeds in my name, and an accountant who had 36 folders of documentation ready to go. Sandra's attorney tried the angle that the properties should be considered marital assets because Sandra's household management had freed me to pursue investment income. It's an argument. My attorney had seen it before. What she hadn't seen was the timeline. The fact that I'd opened a business account 4 years before I bought the first property, that every purchase used funds traced clearly to my individual business income and overtime, and that Sandra had signed a tax return every year that showed her income and mine separately filed. The argument didn't hold. Final settlement, signed in February of the following year. Sandra received her half of the equity in the house on Fernwood Drive. She received half of our joint savings account, which was $14,800 at the time of filing. She received the Buick Enclave she'd been driving since 2020. Total, approximately $38,000. She did not receive a share of Fernwood Property Group. I found out through Becca that Sandra had told her side of the family I had been hiding money, like a secret. I want to address that directly because it matters to me. I filed taxes every year. My accountant knew everything. My attorney knew everything. I kept my business finances separate from household finances, which is what every small business owner is advised to do. If Sandra had asked at any point in 14 years, Harold, what's in the Fernwood Property Group account? I would have told her. She never asked. She assumed she knew what there was to know about me. That assumption cost her. Drew called me in March. I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Dad, I've been thinking." "That's good," I said. "I've been thinking about how I talked about you to Phil's family. To people at work, I told them you did property management." "I know." "I was ashamed," he said. "I don't know why. You never gave me a reason to be ashamed. I didn't say anything right away. I let him sit in it." "Drew," I said finally, "your grandfather was a machinist for 30 years. I was proud to be his son. I was proud to be someone who understood how things work, how to fix them, how to build them. I thought I'd pass that on." "You did," he said. "I just wasn't listening yet." He's listening now. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Sandra moved into a townhouse rental in Dublin. She and Trish had a falling out, from what I heard, around the time it became widely known in their social circle that Sandra had left a man who turned out to own $500,000 in real estate. Trish, apparently, had opinions about that. The book club stopped meeting at Trish's house. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel a small, quiet satisfaction about that. I'm not a saint. I'm a plumber from Westerville who was told in 100 small ways that he wasn't enough. Being proven right, even quietly, in the privacy of my own kitchen. That counts for something. Here's what happened in the months after. Becca called me every Sunday. She called partly to check on me and partly, I think, because she understood she'd been spared something by my honesty at the wedding. If I hadn't said what I said that night, the story she'd have been told about me for the rest of her life would have been the smaller one. She told me once, "Daddy, I always knew you were more than they gave you credit for." I don't know if that's entirely true. But I know she believed it. Drew lost his lease on his apartment in March. He needed a co-signer for a new place, a nicer one than he could technically afford. He called his uncle first, then a college friend. Then he called me. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't co-sign the nicer apartment. I did something different. I had a unit opening up in my Worthington duplex. 2 bedrooms. Clean, updated, fair market rate. I told Drew he could rent it, same as any other tenant. No discount. He'd have to apply, same as anyone else. He applied. He was approved. He moved in April. He pays on time every month. That's not a small thing. The call that surprised me the most came from Dom, Phil's father, in the late spring. He said he'd been telling the story of the wedding speech to people in his professional network. He said he had a colleague who owned 3 rental properties and was struggling to manage them, wanted advice on whether to sell or hire a property manager. He asked if I'd be willing to have coffee with this man and share what I knew. I said yes, over coffee, this man. I'll call him Walter because that's actually his name. Walter told me he'd been managing his properties himself for 6 years and was burning out. I spent 2 hours walking him through what I'd learned. How to find a good property manager, how to evaluate a lease, how to think about cash flow versus appreciation. Walter said it was the most useful 2 hours he'd had in a year. He referred 2 other people to me in the following months. I'm not setting up a consulting business. I'm 61 years old and I like a quiet life, but it turns out that 28 years of walking through buildings and understanding how they work has value in contexts I hadn't imagined. I still drive the same truck. It's 12 years old and it runs fine. I bought a better coffee maker. That's about the only lifestyle change I've made. Last November, Drew called me on a Tuesday evening. He'd just gotten home from work. He said, "Dad, I went to a career fair at Ohio State today. Not as a student, as a company representative. He works in insurance now, middle management. He'd been assigned to represent his company. He said, 'Dad, the kids were asking me questions, and this one kid asked what I'd recommend for someone who wanted financial stability long term. And I told him to learn a trade.' I didn't say anything for a moment. The counselor next to me gave me a look," Drew continued, "like I'd said something strange. And I just thought, no. Dad was right about this. Dad was right about a lot of things I didn't want to hear. That was worth more to me than the $97,000. I mean that. Becca and Phil are doing well. They bought a house last spring, a fix-upper in Grandview Heights. Phil called me to walk through the plumbing before they closed. I told him what I saw. 2 things that needed attention before winter. He got them fixed. He thanked me with the kind of gratitude that comes from realizing someone just saved them from a much bigger problem down the road. That's the thing about what I know. It was never nothing. It was never small. It just wasn't the kind of knowledge that announces itself. Sandra and I had our final conversation in December by phone after the settlement was signed. She asked if there was anything I'd wanted to say throughout the whole process that I hadn't said. I thought about it. I wanted you to ask, I said. Ask what? Anything about the business, about the properties, about what I was doing all those years when I was supposedly just getting by. I paused. I wasn't hiding. I was just waiting for you to be curious about me. You never were. She didn't respond to that for a long time. Then she said, I think I made a mistake. I told her I thought so too, and I meant it without any pleasure. When you spend 31 years with someone, their mistakes are also yours. You didn't notice what they couldn't see. You stopped trying to show them. That's on both of us, but I'm not carrying it anymore. I'm Harold Briggs. I spent 28 years fixing things that were broken. I spent 14 years building something most people in my life didn't know existed. I walked my daughter down the aisle on the same week my marriage ended, and I stood up in a room full of people and told the truth without raising my voice. I'm 61 years old. I have 6 properties, a coffee maker that actually works, and a son who tells career fair students to learn a trade. That's enough. That's more than enough. If you're watching this from wherever you are, if you're the person in your family who shows up without getting credit for showing up, I want you to know something. Quiet is not the same as empty. Patient is not the same as passive. And the person who never gets introduced correctly at parties sometimes turns out to be the most interesting person in the room. You just have to wait for them to ask. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not obsessively. I'm past that. But quietly, the way you do when something big has finally settled and you can look at it without flinching. What I keep coming back to is this. Sandra didn't lose because she filed for divorce. She lost because she spent 31 years deciding she already knew who I was. She stopped being curious about me somewhere around the time she started comparing our life to Trish's boat and the Garcia's trip to Portugal. And once you stop being curious about the person you live with, you stop seeing them. You see a version of them you've already decided on, and you make every choice based on that version. That's not a Sandra problem. That's a human problem. I've done it too, in smaller ways, with people I thought I had figured out. The difference is the cost. When you make that mistake with someone who's been quietly building something for 14 years, the cost is real. What I want to say about Drew is this. His call from that career fair meant more to me than any of the financial stuff ever did, not because I needed the validation. I stopped needing that the day I walked my daughter down the aisle and understood clearly that I had done my job. I mean, it mattered, because Drew had to earn that understanding himself. He had to go through the discomfort of losing the safety net he thought he had, get a smaller apartment, pay rent on time to his own father, and stand in front of a room full of college kids and give honest advice. He had to build the muscle. I couldn't hand it to him. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell stories like mine. The part where the lesson has to hurt a little before it sticks. Becca already knew. Some people just come into the world with that particular kind of sight. The ability to look at someone doing ordinary work with full dignity and recognize it for what it is. I don't know where she got it. Maybe she got it from watching me come home dirty and tired and still make dinner and still show up on Saturday and still not complain. Maybe you can absorb things like that when you're young if someone around you is living them consistently. I hope so. The thing about integrity, Real integrity, not the bumper sticker kind, is that it doesn't require an audience. I wasn't keeping those properties secret to set up a dramatic reveal. I was keeping them because I was doing what I'd always done. Showing up, doing the work, building something, not asking for credit. The reveal happened because the circumstances demanded honesty, not as a weapon. As a fact, what I know now, at 61, is that patience and discipline practiced over years have a way of compounding, not just financially. In who you become. I am more at peace today than I was at 40 or 50, and it's not because my circumstances are easier. It's because I spent decades doing what I said I would do, and that gives you a kind of steadiness that nothing outside of you can touch. If I could say one thing to anyone watching this who feels invisible in their own life, do the work anyway. Build the thing anyway. Let the people who've decided who you are keep that version. Your actual life is being built in the real world, in real time, by real choices. And eventually, the truth of it will speak for itself. You just have to give it enough time.